So the question we have is for two non-zero complex number z1 and z2, if the real part of z1 and z2, if the real part z1 and z2 multiplied is 0 and the real part of z1 plus z2 is also 0, then which of the following are possible? So the option we have is the imaginary part of z1 greater than 0 and the imaginary part of 2z2 is greater than 0. So these are four options we have. So let's try how we can solve it. So first what we will do, z1 is equal to x1 plus I y1. So we will assume the z1 is x1 plus I y1. Also we can assume z2 is equal to x2 plus I y2. x2 plus I y2. Next, what we will do, as we can see here that the real part of z1 into z2 is mentioned as 0. So what we will do, we will multiply z1 into z2 first. z1 into z2 we will multiply. So we will get x1 plus I y1 multiplied by x2 plus I y2. Right. So in multiplying process, what we will get, x1 into x2 plus, we will not multiply this thing, the x1 into I y2 part, because here we will get the imaginary part. Also when we multiply I y1 to the x2, we will get the imaginary part, so better avoid it. Now what we will get, when we multiply I y1 to I y2, what we will get, I into I is I square and the value of I square we know is minus 1. So we will get minus y1 y2, and this will become 0 and this will become 0, and we will assume it the equation first. Now the next part is the real part of z1 plus z2 is also 0. So the real part of z1 plus z2 is, the real part of z1 plus z2, we can write, the real part we have is x1 plus x2. So we can write x1 plus x2 is equal to 0, and we can assume this equation as equation number 2. So now we can see that if we want to write x1 in the form of x2, we can write x1 is equal to minus x2. x1 is equal to minus x2, right? So here we can write that in place of x2 here, in place of x1, sorry, x1 we can write x2 in equation number 1. So equation 1 will become, equation 1 becomes, now we will replace the value of x1. Equation 1 becomes minus x2 into x2 is equal to y1 into y2, right? Or we can write it as y1 into y2 is equal to minus x2 square, right? So this is the x2 is the real part of z2, y1 is the imaginary part of z1, y2 is the imaginary part of z2. So what we can conclude from here, that when we multiply y1 and y2, that is the imaginary part of z1 and z2, we get a negative. This one is a negative, the square is negative, and this is less than 0. So the option which satisfies either the imaginary part of z1 will be 0 or the imaginary part of z2 will be 0. In that only case we can get it negative. So we can try the option. So the B option is imaginary part of z1 is less than 0 and the imaginary part of z2 is greater than 0. This option will satisfy. But one more option is there, is either condition, that imaginary z1, the imaginary part of z1, that is the y1, is greater than 0 and the imaginary part of z2 is less than 0. So option B and C both will satisfy this, and we will get it option number 3. This will be the answer of this question.